Hi, and welcome back to RPMbassy with myself, John and Mark. We are now at number 6. You probably notice a bit of a theme going on now because my next record, again, it kind of connects with the story before with the Public Enemy album. When I said there was a couple of albums that were brought back from America for a friend of mine, and it was the Beastie Boys' License to Ill. Yeah. Now, I'm sorry, if you don't have a copy of this record, you do not like music. I think everyone's got a copy of this record, License to Ill. There's a couple of interesting facts about this album as well. It came out in November 1986 on Def Jam. When this album first came out, it was going to have another name, but the label didn't want the name. And years later, the band said thank God, because it was going to be called Don't Be a Faggot, was going to be the name of the album. And I'm so glad they didn't call it that. I think License to Ill is much better. So when the album came out, they did the Def Jam tour, obviously signed to Def Jam. And they were really close to people like Run DMC, because there's a track on this album that a lot of people don't realise, Slow and Low, which is actually a Run DMC track that they gave to Beastie Boys to do for this album. And it's one of my favourites. One of my favourite instruments is the 808, and it's literally just an 808 and the Beastie Boys rapping over the top of it. Also, the producer, Rick Rubin, who was obviously part of Def Jam, produced this album. But at the same time, he signed and was producing Slayer, their big album, just trying to think what it was, Rain in Blood, which is on Def Jam. It was a great album, right?
Unreal album.
So the guitarist...
Kerry King?
Yeah, so he came and did the guitar on No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which is a take on No Sleep Till Hammersmith. So there's a lot of kind of cross-references in this album. The sampling is just insane. And also this album got sampled in a lot of tracks as well, especially tracks like Hold It Now, Hit It. A lot of the scratch routines would use a lot of their kind of vocal breaks in this album. But it got to number 1 in the UK. It did really well in the America. It's won all its kind of like platinum awards, all of that. But it's an album, like when you read a lot of the stuff, when you read their book, they kind of forgot about this because I don't think they had a very good friendship with Def Jam Records. I think they lost out a lot of money or something along them lines. So it's a shame because this album was crazy. This whole record. I mean, every track on this album people know. Fight for Your Right to Pipe, which is probably my least, but it was probably their biggest hit. Girls, which you couldn't release now because in this day and age, but it's on this album. And I'm sure, I mean, they were kids, remember? They were like really young when they did this album, so they were just, you know, prep boys from at school, just having a good time, drinking beer. And, you know, they kind of, when they did the live shows, they had this. I mean, they had the big... Have you ever seen them live?
No.
So I've seen them when they did this tour and he came to the UK, and it was all over the papers, and you know, this big inflatable penis would come out, and which a lot of people are doing it now. When I've seen Peaches recently, she did exactly the same, but it wasn't in the papers. But they used to have these go-go dancers at the stage, and they would throw beer on them. It was a laugh. They also supported Madonna on a tour as well. So this band for me are just huge, and I loved everything they've done since. Obviously No More, and obviously the album after this, Paul's Boutique, was also going to be in this list because that's an incredible album as well. But I decided just to go for one of them. And it's a Beastie Boys, License to Ill. Think about the artwork. It's supposed to have been... I found a little bit about the artwork. It features an American Boeing 727 with the Beastie Boys logo on the tail, which has crashed head-on into the side of a mountain. Now, I always thought it was like that, but it's not. It's supposed to be like that. I literally just found that out. It's got the Def Jam logo and the 3MTA3, which spells, which I didn't know till research on this, Eat Me.
Oh, yeah.
Eat Me. If you put that in the mirror, it will say Eat Me, which I never knew. Incredible. There's little details like that I love. But the artwork is just insane. I think Eminem released an album a couple of years ago and he kind of ripped off the...
Kamikaze, I think.
It's called, the Kamikaze album, ripped off the album sleeve. But it's such an iconic sleeve. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, once you kind of open it all up. And then the inside... I thought they could have had a better picture than that because I'm sure there's better ones than that to kind of waste on something so big. But every track on this album, I mean, we know them. I'm not even going to go into them because you know everything about this album, I'm sure. And it's a Beastie Boys License to Ill. If you haven't checked it out, where have you been? Mark.
So, next up on my list, I've got Periphery 3 by Periphery. So this album came out in 2016. It was kind of felt like quite a quick release. Like they're not a slow band by any means in terms of releases, but it does generally seem like they quite like to take their time. And this one kind of felt as if it wasn't as if they hadn't tried or anything like that. It kind of felt like a lot more relaxed, as if they they just kind of sat down and like, yeah, let's just do some songs. They weren't like focused on like worrying about like a particular theme or anything like that. Like the album that came previous to this was a double album, Alpha and Omega. And that was like super, super thematic. They had lots and lots of like motifs and melodies that were like used throughout the entire album. Lots of bits and pieces that were like referential to projects previous. And in fact, the Alpha and Omega, they called it Juggernaut as like a collective. And it was meant to be a project from years back that they were going to release, and they never, like, it was never completed, and like songs came in, songs came out of the project. And that album, like, they spent ages and ages and ages in the album and really like went down into the minutiae of how to record it, how to get like the exact guitar tones they wanted, everything. Like there's recording footage of them, and there's one riff that they're doing where they've actually got the at the time the bassist holding down strings on the guitar to stop them ringing out, whereas normally, you know, you just have like a hairband or something like that. Like he's holding down stuff while the riff's being played just to get it exactly right. Like it's so particular. But this one's like a lot more laid back feeling, and I actually kind of prefer it because of that. I think for me at least, I find that a lot with a lot of bands, like the albums that they kind of like put out in between their big really like focused projects, the ones where they're just songwriting and they're just having fun and just doing it for the sake of writing some songs. Those actually kind of I enjoy more. There's a few bands that have done that sort of thing where I've ended up really appreciating the kind of like quick, easy release because, I don't know, it's a little bit more spontaneous. And this kind of feels like that. Like there's only one track, or actually no, tell a lie. There's 2 tracks on here that have riffs that were from previous projects. I mean, Periphery as a band, they have a lot of like riffs that you may have heard previously in the past in like studio videos, or they've done like little clips on Instagram or something like that, and then the album comes out and you go, oh, that's that one. But whereas like Juggernaut and the albums that came previous had songs like spanning back years and years and years, there's only really 2 tracks on here that kind of have those links back to older stuff, and a lot of it is kind of super fresh and was just for the album. Tracks on here that were released as singles, you've got Marigold, which like the music video for that is absolutely batshit. It's all 3D animated and it's like the silliest shit. And I think that kind of like highlights the band as a whole. Like it's serious music, but there's silly stuff in there. And video wise, I think you could probably count on like one hand the music videos they've had that were serious. Like most of them are comedy-oriented videos, or you can tell they're not actually being serious. Like it's a very tongue-in-cheek kind of approach to it, which I kind of like. A lot of metal bands take themselves a bit too seriously, I think, and you know they have a lot of fun with this sort of stuff. Yeah, production-wise, absolutely killer. Adam Getgood, who's a producer based, I think he's in Bath. He was in the band at the time when they recorded this. He was the bass player at the time. He left following this purely because like the lifestyle of touring made more sense for him to be a producer full time. And to be fair, like the stuff that he's worked on since then, like it does make sense. Like he's a fantastic producer, and I think he is better off doing that. He has more value as a producer than he does as a bass player. Not that he's a bad bass player. Like he's excellent. It's frustrating to see him do the things that he does because like I don't think he's like made a bad piece of work in his life. It's frustrating.
It just seems like there's this whole world of like heavy bands I've never heard of. This undercurrent, especially in the UK, just hearing about all these different heavy bands coming up that I've just completely missed.
Yeah, I mean these guys. I mean. As a band as a whole, they're actually US based, and now they're kind of all over the place. Like you know, the members have moved into all kinds of different states and stuff like that. They've always kind of been one of the more popular bands in, and they, you know, this is this is kind of like a video in and of itself. But Gent is it's not a genre, but it's kind of a genre. So it's spelled DJENT. Wow. And it's a like onomatopoeic word for like how like when you're palm muting on a guitar, like jung, 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 that kind of sound. Yeah. So in terms of that sound, Meshuggah is a band that was by most people is credited as being like the kind of pioneers of that. that kind of like really heavy progressive metal with like a focus on like changing timings and stuff like that. Like Meshuggah as a band, 99% of their work is in 4/4, but they've got a lot of weird rhythmic stuff sitting in that 4/4 pattern, and a lot of bands in the mid 2000s and the early 2010s took that kind of style on, and Periphery's band that like really ran with that, and probably are one of the most popular ones for that kind of sound. And then since they first started, they've kind of progressed to the stage now where they're trying a lot more things. Like they're a lot more rocky now. They're a lot more electronic oriented. They're just making songs that they think sound good. And this, like I said, this is where they've kind of gotten rid of a lot of the formulaic stuff, and they've just gone like, yeah, let's have this kind of song. Let's have this kind of song. Let's just try something. The Way the News Goes, another song which is like super, super clean for a lot of the track. Not a lot of screaming on it, which for like a modern progressive metal band, like usually there are a lot of screams. Loon as well, the final track on the album, that's pretty much just like a ballad, like the whole way through. And that, if you ever get the chance to see them live, Loon is, if they're playing that on their set, that's a really, really amazing track live. And yeah, they can back it up live as well. Like they are fantastic. This album, as I said, a lot more of a relaxed release from them, at least in my opinion. And the sound of it, the songs on it, absolutely cracking.